Hello and welcome to this video on production possibility frontiers. So let's boldly go to the final frontier. In this video, we're going to look at what is meant by a production possibility frontier, commonly called a PPF. We're going to look at how it illustrates opportunity cost and how it illustrates economic growth. So let's start off by looking at a quick example of this concept. Let's imagine that in our classroom we spent the next lesson producing two items, paper planes or paper swans. And we're going to look at how many we could produce. What's the limit we could produce? Well, let's imagine we've got 0 on our axes here. If we spent all our time producing paper planes, let's imagine that we could produce 40. So we could potentially produce 40 paper planes and 0 paper swans. Or alternatively, if we spent all our time producing paper swans, we could produce 35 paper swans and 0 paper planes. Now, of course, we could do differently and actually allocate our time not just to one or the other, but to some combination of the two. So we could have some combination of paper planes and paper swans. If we allocated some people to do paper planes and some people to do paper swans, we could make different combinations in between. Let's imagine that this blue line represents what we could make. So we could make perhaps about 20 paper planes and about 30 paper swans. So this blue line here represents the limit or the frontier of what we could possibly produce in our class. What we'll note is that we can't produce 40 paper planes and 35 paper swans. That's outside of our limit up here. That wouldn't be achievable. But we could have produced a combination of planes and swans that's inside the limit. Down here, that is of course achievable. So we could, for example, produce 20 paper planes and 30 paper swans within our lesson, and that will be indicated by this point here on the limit of our production possibility frontier. So we can use this concept to look at economies and say how much can they produce and what affects how much they can produce. So a production possibility frontier is a curve which shows the maximum potential output of one type of good given the level of output for all other goods in the economy given the available resources. And this is an important definition, so let's take it down in our notes. Now, before we move on to look at an example, we're going to just quickly mention in the next few slides capital goods and consumer goods. So let's just quickly look at what these are. Consumer goods are goods that are things like shirts, shoes, pens, TV sets, things that people want to buy, like you and me. Capital goods are things like tools, factories, tractors, and so on, things that are used by businesses to produce consumer goods. And if you think about it, nearly everything that's produced within an economy falls into one of these two categories. So it's a good way of splitting up all the goods and services in an economy into two categories, consumer goods and capital goods. So let's have a look at a production possibility frontier. We'll go through it and then I'll ask you to jot some stuff down once we've been through it. So let's imagine our economy can produce either capital goods or consumer goods. Now, here is our production possibility frontier. And if we devoted all our resources to just producing capital goods, we could produce a maximum of Ym. That's just on our scale. It just represents a number, Y million number of capital goods. If we spent all our time producing consumer goods, we'd be able to produce Xm of consumer goods. Or alternatively, we can produce some combination of the two. Like A, we're producing whatever would be our scale here on the left-hand side. We'd be producing this many consumer goods, so capital goods, and this many consumer goods. And that will be indicated here by YO and XO. So YO capital goods and XO consumer goods. And so an economy can produce on any point here on the PPF. They can make a decision about how much of each to produce in their economy. B, if an economy was to reallocate its resources and actually produce B, it can produce more consumer goods, but this is the key point, only at the expense of fewer capital goods. So here we've made a sacrifice. By having more consumer goods, we now have less capital goods. And the result of having X1, now consumer goods, x1 to x0 more consumer goods is we've lost y0 to y1 in terms of capital goods. So our economy moving from A to B, we've gained x0 to x1 consumer goods, we've gained this many more consumer goods, but we've lost, by doing that, we've lost this many capital goods. So we can use the PPF to illustrate the concept of opportunity cost. Here, an economy switching from capital goods to more consumer goods results in an opportunity cost of this many capital goods. So here's what we've just been through. If you want to take a screenshot of this and print it out and put it in your notes, that would be a good idea. Or if you want to copy it down, that would be absolutely fine as well. So some reminders: production possibility frontiers show the different combination of goods and services that can be produced with a given amount of resources. There is no ideal point on the curve, they just show us where an economy or what quantities an economy might possibly produce. Any point inside the curve suggests resources are not being utilised efficiently. We've got some spare resources. Any point outside the curve is not attainable with the current level of resources. It can be used to demonstrate economic growth, which we'll show in a second, and opportunity cost, as we've just shown. So let's consider a production possibility frontier again. We've got combinations of capital goods and consumer goods, and the economy is producing at position A, so y0 and x0 numbers of goods. B, producing less capital goods and consumer goods than we might otherwise do, would indicate that we've got unemployed resources. We're not using all the resources, we're not producing on the limit of what we can produce, we're producing inside it, we've got some spare resources going on. Position C can only be produced if we get more resources. As things stand, we can only produce on the limit on the blue curve. So C, that combination wouldn't be achievable unless we gain resources. And if we do, here they come, that would increase our production possibility frontier. So when our production possibility frontier shifts to the right, that indicates economic growth. We've got more resources and the economy can now produce greater combinations of capital goods and consumer goods. For example, Y1, X1. So let's finish off some key terms for our PPF topic. I'm going to bring these up. Just want to make sure you're comfortable with these, maybe jot them down in your notes, and then once you've done that, we are there. So in this video, we've looked at what is meant by a production possibility frontier. We've seen how we can use it to illustrate opportunity cost and economic growth. Well done, it's all over.